We're discovering the most evil and dangerous British killers since 2011, and yet we're starting with what is possibly the most outrageous mistake of justice this century, Lucy Letby. Having joined the neonatal team at the Countess of Chester Hospital in January 2012, on the evening of the 8th of June 2015, nurse Lucy Letby injected air into a vein of her first victim, baby A. The air blocked the blood supply to the baby's heart and lungs, which rapidly led to the baby's agonised death. Between then and June 2016, Letby murdered a further 6 babies in the same way. She carried out her 8 attempted murders by means of air embolisms, insulin poisoning and overfeeding her victims, many of these 8 babies having suffered permanent brain damage as a result of these attempts on their life. The number of twins and triplets amongst Letby's victims stands out. Nurse Letby's first 3 murders came in the space of a fortnight. Before then, the hospital's newborn mortality rate had, for years, been 1 to 2 per year. So yeah, the parents of Nurse Letby's multiple victims all hate this killer nurse, and so do we. With the exception of Mark MacDonald, Letby's new barrister, Tory MP David Davis, neonatologist Dr. Shu Lee and Professor Nina Modi, and numerous other public figures along with a great many lay people. Taking home multiple handover sheets, writing in one's diary the words, "I am evil, I did this, I killed those babies because I am not good enough," searching on Facebook for the parents of any one or more of the 15 babies in question are things that don't even count as circumstantial evidence of murder, I personally feel anyway, never mind being direct evidence of murder. On this point, all the evidence against Nurse Letby was circumstantial. The Countess of Chester Hospital was literally a shithole offering shitty medical care. The place had human poo coming out of its taps, had tiles coming off the ceilings, was vastly understaffed, babies with infections weren't getting their antibiotics, doctors were visiting babies not once a day as required, but barely once a week. And the fact that baby deaths went down as soon as Nurse Letby was taken off clinical duties and given an admin role instead is no evidence, whether direct or circumstantial, of her being guilty of a single murder.
Just to summarise all the findings we had in terms of the medical problems that we are seeing at this hospital, we found that the medical histories were incomplete. There was a failure to consider the obstetric history. There was disregard for surveillance warnings about bacterial colonization. There was misdiagnosis of diseases in these babies. They were caring for babies that were probably beyond their expected ability or designated level of care. There were unsafe delays in diagnosis and treatment of acutely ill patients. There were poor skills at resuscitation and intubation. There was poor supervision of junior doctors in procedures like intubation. There were poor skills in basic medical procedures like insertion of chest tubes. There was lack of understanding. In summary, ladies and gentlemen, we did not find any murders. In all cases, death or injury were due to natural causes or just bad medical care. Lucy was charged with 7 murders and 7 attempted murders. In our opinion, the medical evidence doesn't support murder in any of these babies, just natural causes and bad medical care.
There were plausible reasons, very, very plausible reasons for these babies' deaths, and that there was a combination, if you take the totality of the 17 cases, there was a combination of babies being in the wrong place, delivered in the wrong place, delayed diagnosis, and inappropriate or absent treatment.
As for the fall in the mortality rate that people noted once Nurse Letby was removed from her clinical role, the hospital had by this point reduced the number of babies on the unit and increased the minimum gestation from 27 weeks to 32 weeks, which triggered a drop in the mortality rate. Even then, people like Dr. John Gibbs claimed that the fall in the mortality rate wasn't fully explained by the changes to the maternity unit that I've just mentioned. However, the findings of Dr. Shu Lee and Professor Modi, which say that no murders took place, still stand up. Dr. Dewey Evans, the expert witness for the prosecution, uses his earnings from his services as an expert witness to keep his daughter in the horses that she loves and to afford himself and his family other luxuries, say certain folk, who find his claim of, quote, never having lost a case, unquote, markedly suspicious, indicating, as it appears to do, that his testimony is far from impartial. Far more importantly, though, is that, according to Dr. Lee, Dr. Evans misrepresented Dr. Lee's own 1989 paper on air embolisms as a cause of death in newborns.
In this particular case, because they used my paper, I was curious to see what exactly did they use my paper for. And when I saw the evidence that they gave, I was disturbed because it was wrong. And after I gave the appeal, I realized that she had no further road to go because she had exhausted all avenues of appeal. And yet, it remained that the evidence was wrong. Now, I didn't know at the time whether she was innocent or guilty. What I did know was that the evidence that was used to convict her was wrong. And to me, that's a problem. When it comes to Dr. Evans' testimony and his opinions, I would ask you to ask 3 questions. First of all, the first question would be, if our panel found so many problems with the medical care provided by this team at this hospital, how is it that Dr. Evans found none? Because in none of the 17 cases did he even identify one problem with the medical care provided at the hospital. The second question I would ask is this. He seemed to be rather selective in his use of information. So if he wasn't selective, if all the information was used, in fact, you would come to a very different conclusion than what he came to. Just take, for example, the case of the hypoglycemia, where he said there was no sugar for 2 hours and the blood sugar grows, therefore it must be insulin. In fact, he missed the one important value, which was at 1146, showing that the blood sugar in fact did not rise. So was he just careless or was it deliberate? The next question that I would ask is, even when there's an obvious cause of death, why did he go around looking for malfeasance?
Cheshire Police themselves have stood by both their investigation into Lucy Letby and the outcomes of Letby's 2 criminal trials. But they weren't meant to be the ones doing the investigation into Lucy Letby in the first place. The investigation of death in healthcare settings that require sensitive, serious and complex decisions are always meant to be referred to the CPS Serious Crime and Counter-Terrorism Division. On this very point, when earlier in 2026, Cheshire Police actually did put 11 additional charges against Letby to the SCD. The SCD categorically rejected those 11 charges on grounds that the evidential test was not met in any one of those cases. Plus, there's a small fact that even before the police stepped in, a number of reviews of the Countess of Chester Hospital had been carried out and they hadn't detected a single trace of criminal activity, just poor medical care. Cheshire Police's decision to launch an investigation into Lucy Letby came from a meeting between Cheshire Police and Dr. Stephen Brary, Dr. John Gibbs, Dr. Ravi Jayaram and one other doctor who's anonymous, who of course worked with Letby at the Countess of Chester Hospital and who of course had all been involved in seriously inadequate care of newborn babies themselves, resulting in some cases in the deaths of newborn babies. Mark MacDonald, Letby's barrister, has submitted his dossier to the CCRC, Criminal Cases Review Commission, in a bid to win a new appeal for his client on grounds of the failings of her original defence team. Ben Myers, Letby's original barrister, had all the findings from Dr. Lee and Professor Modi and from all the rest of the panel that I've shown, but failed to make meaningful use of them. The man chose to call as his expert witness, for instance, not any medical expert, but a plumber. The outcome from the CCRC is, at the time of this recording, awaited. What if, as her 2 trials deemed, Lucy Letby is a serial killer of newborn babies? Just look at the sort of people that she'll have fooled. Strictly speaking, at the time of this recording, Anthony Russell was a triple murderer, but the thing is, on the 26th of February 2026 at HMP Frankland, he did this thing with a spiked metal club that split another man's head open and killed the man. Before we get into his story, if I've got you hooked on the video so far, do subscribe, give the video a like, drop a comment when you're ready, and donate. Hit the thanks button below, I'll appreciate you. In October 2020, Russell, who comes from Coventry, got it into his head that his mate, David Williams, was sleeping with his girlfriend. In the murderous attack on David that he then made, he left the man with as many as 87 injuries. Despite all that damage to his body, David's cause of death was later confirmed as strangulation. For your information, David wasn't sleeping with Russell's woman. He lost his life for nothing. Some days later, when David's mother, Julia, went to Russell and asked him if he'd seen her son, after saying no and then helping her look for him, he murdered her as well. It's thought that the killer did what he did when Julia let on that she knew that he'd killed her son, which left him, to his mind, with no choice other than to kill her as well in order to prevent her from talking. Russell strangled Julia with extreme force as well as battering her, causing her a total of 113 separate injuries. Shortly after Julia's sister reported her missing, police went to her flat and found her lying dead on the living room floor. After his second act of murder, the perpetrator, a heroin user, scarpered over to Leamington Spa and promptly attacked a 72-year-old woman before stealing 200 quid from her. When he befriended 31-year-old Nicole McGregor, along with her boyfriend, he learned early on that Nicole was 18 weeks pregnant. Nicole was actually already a mother, but all her children were in care, and Nicole was determined to straighten her life out and at least be a responsible mother to her coming baby. Nicole, you understand, was a lifelong drug addict, and she was still taking drugs even then while pregnant. It was on the promise of drugs from Russell that she agreed to go off to some woodland with the man without her boyfriend just a few hours after she first met him. Her body was found in the woods 3 days later, and, just like in the case of Russell's first two victims, it held numerous injuries, Russell having given her a ferocious battering before once again strangling her to death. The act of rape that he perpetrated on her before murdering her is again thought to be why he killed her. He didn't want her going to the police. Before Nicole's body was found, Russell had gone and helped her very worried boyfriend look for her, commenting in regard to the baby that he, the boyfriend, and Nicole were expecting, quote, "I bet you can't wait for it to be born," unquote. Yes, Russell was fully aware when he said those words that because of him, the baby would never be born. Russell next followed a 78-year-old man, who he had just politely asked for directions, into his home, bashed him up, and then stole the man's car, a Ford C-Max. He was captured a day or two later in Burton-upon-Trent, sleeping in the car. Russell's killing, rape, assault and robbery spree unravelled in the space of a single week. When, in 2022, he gave heroin addict Russell his whole life order, life without parole that is, the judge described the man as exceptionally dangerous, manipulative and callous, showing a complete absence of empathy, conscience or restraint, unquote, which sets us up quite neatly for the events that unfolded in a workshop at HMP Frankland on the 26th of February 2026. By this point, Russell, whose cell was near to Huntley's own, both being located in a segregation wing reserved for so-called vulnerable prisoners, inmates walking around with a target on their back to put it plainly, really had it in for Huntley. In the days leading up to now, the two had, for reasons that I couldn't trace, been arguing and shouting at each other a lot, Huntley having taken, in consequence, to bullying Russell and trying to turn others against him. After yet another heated row between the two men that took place when they were both scrubbing out the prison's waste management workshop, Russell picked up the 3-foot-long spiked metal pole that he had somehow got from a waste metal crate without anyone noticing, approached Huntley from behind and whacked the man on the head over and over with his deadly weapon. As the prison officers dragged Russell away, he shouted, "I've done it! I've done it! I've killed him! I've killed him!" Prison staff themselves thought that Huntley, who was lying in a pool of blood with his head split open, was already dead. Huntley died at Royal Victoria Infirmary in Newcastle on the 7th of March 2026, a few hours after his ventilator was switched off, his brain having since gone into a vegetative state and the man himself having gone blind. At the time of this recording, Russell was due to plea at Teesside Crown Court on the 24th of April 2026. If the man is convicted, as you can see, it will hardly make any difference to him. He's already going to be locked up for the rest of his life. The worst that could happen to him is being moved to a new prison, doing a spell in solitary confinement and going without his prison privileges for a while. After Ian Huntley got a club to the head, killer cop Wayne Couzens expressed his fear, reportedly, that he would be next. Sir, after what you did, you've got no right to even hold that fear, never mind express it. Killer cop Wayne Couzens was complaining about the threats against his life that he has suffered even before the murder of Ian Huntley, which took place in the prison where Couzens is held. Then again, how could the man have expected not to end up in prison after doing what he did back in 2021 during COVID? On the night of the 3rd of March 2021, Couzens got out of his hire car in Clapham, South London, went up to a random woman on the street who happened to be a 33-year-old marketing executive called Sarah Everard, falsely arrested her for breaching COVID restrictions, and then drove her all the way down to Kent, raped her in some woods, and then strangled her to death with his very police belt. The man exposed himself to every street camera between Clapham and Kent. He'd booked his hire car in his true name and used his mobile phone in the area where he raped and murdered his victim. This guy was a police officer who knows how police catch criminals. And yet, he genuinely got the shock of his life when, 6 days after he did what he did, his colleagues came for him in relation to Sarah's disappearance, and likewise, having been totally unprepared for that moment, he improvised the most stupid cover story for his act of kidnap that you've ever heard in your life.
Well, I am in financial shit. And I've been lent on by, I don't know who they are. They're a group, a gang, whatever. And they told me, right, I need to go and pick up girls and give them to them. There's a couple of names. I was told a place to take her. That's it. That is all I know.
The one truth that the man told his fellow coppers was that he was broke. God only knows what he was spending his Metropolitan Police officer salary on though, or was his salary just not enough to support a family of 4 down in Kent? A skint copper can be kicked out of the force or just not be allowed to join in the first place, since having money problems makes a copper susceptible to taking bribes. What also came out after the man's conviction was that he had committed a number of acts of flashing, was addicted to extreme you-know-whatography, and tried to get his colleagues to watch that sort of stuff as well. And he's once run away from home and gone missing, and I mean as a married father of 2, another behaviour for which a copper can be sacked. Couzens appealed against his whole life order, a sentence that means that a prisoner is never getting out, on grounds that he just didn't deserve to be locked up forever. The appeal court said, yes you do, and duly rejected his appeal. So frankly, the man had better get used to having his life threatened, because he's going to be locked up until he dies. And there is every chance that he will be fatally attacked by any one or more of his inmates, just like the Soham guy. David Fuller prefers his great victims dead, and if they're not already dead when he gains access to them, guess what he does?
Hello. Morning. David, it's the police. Hello. We need to come and speak to you. Oh, yes.
Presenting hospital maintenance worker, husband, father of 4, burglar, PDF file, rapist and double murderer, David Fuller.
David, you're under arrest on suspicion of the murders of Wendy Nell and Caroline Pearce in 1987. Do you understand? You do not have to say anything, but it may harm your defence if you do not mention when questioned.
This December 2020 arrest of David Fuller, who was born in 1954 and comes from Kent, southeast England, was no less than 33 years in the making. The man's murder of 25-year-old Wendy Nell having come in June 1987, while his murder of 20-year-old Caroline Pearce came in November 1987. Taking place in Tunbridge Wells, Kent. Owing to the sort of place where each of the 2 victims lived, the 2 murders became known as the bedsit murders. The acts of rape that Fuller was found to have perpetrated against both Wendy and Caroline most likely came after the 2 women died, which prefigures, if you like, the hobby that the man rapidly developed in his many years as a maintenance engineer at 2 Kent hospitals. Of the 102 corpses, all female of course, that Fuller graped and essayed in the CCTV lacking mortuaries of the 2 said hospitals, the youngest was but 9, while the oldest was 100. In the videos that the perpetrator made of these disgusting acts of his, he's seen placing his thing, let's say, inside the mouths, the A bleep USES and the VA bleep INAS of these bodies. I am disguising certain words because of YouTube's decency policies. The man also used his tongue and fingers in his acts, graping and essaying some of the corpses repeatedly over a number of days. This is the moment where the perpetrator sheepishly confesses to his acts of grape against the dead bodies held in his place of work.
I want to admit I am admitting the offences, but I don't really want to go into detail.
Yeah. Okay.
If you appreciate that.
So they asked him why he did what he did and other things like that, and he said at one point, who cares about the victims? They were already dead. Yeah, we know that, but for instance, when one relative of one of the bodies that he violated found out what he'd done, they killed themselves. And there's this other woman who spoke to the news about what the effect of what the man had done to her daughter's dead body, her only child, had on her. She was totally devastated, as you might imagine. In the raid of Fuller's home, police found numerous images downloaded from the internet showing women and girls who'd been raped and or murdered. They also found no fewer than 4 million indecent images of you-know-what sort of people. As for the man's career as a burglar, this unravelled between 1973 and 1976, the man gaining dozens of convictions for that offence in that period. The police finally got on David Fuller's scent, thanks, as you might imagine, to advances in DNA analysis. They used, to be exact, an analysis technique known as familial DNA, and they used that against the fingerprints, the footprints, the white sauce sample, if you see what I mean, and the saliva samples coming from the 2 murder victims, Caroline and Wendy, and the results led them to David Fuller. In December 2021, after his trial was cut short when he changed his plea to the charges of murder relating to Wendy Nell and Caroline Pierce from not guilty to guilty, Fuller got a whole life order. The 2 murders were, of course, the lead offences, but the man was also sentenced at this point for his mortuary-based hobby and for downloading indecent images of you-know-who. In November 2022, though, the man pleaded guilty to and was sentenced for a further 16 counts of necro thingy. As you can see, though, at this point, the man had nothing whatsoever to lose. In September 2021, Damien Bendall, the sleepover killer, committed a horrific set of murders plus a grape for no reason except that he was high.
I don't know what happened. Alright, come to me.
This guy talks about his acts of murder like he's talking about the weather.
Right, do you just want to undo your coat? Have you armed yourself?
Yeah.
You have?
Have you stabbed yourself, mate?
I can see blood on your hands.
Yeah.
Anywhere else?
Just my chest, 4 inches in with a bread knife.
Can we have a look?
And one on the stomach. I bled quite.
Right, do you want?
Yeah. Can we go down this?
No, just stay there.
I just don't want to be in front of them.
Alright, just around the corner.
Just walking wounded in a minute.
Alright, stand here. Stay here.
Right.
So
We told you, I know what's going to happen to you now, mate.
Well, I know it's going to happen
just
when we go to prison, obviously, but again.
Why? What have you done? Have you done something to anyone else?
Yeah.
What have you done?
I've murdered 4 people.
Damien Bendall committed his horrendous acts under the influence of drugs. He murdered, first of all, his girlfriend, who was pregnant with his child. Then he murdered her 2 young children. And then he murdered the school friend of one of the children who was staying over. This all took place in the Derbyshire town of Kilmarsh in September 2021. He also confessed to the rape of one of the children, a little girl. If you need any further convincing of just how remorseless and unempathetic this man is, straight after committing the 4 murders, he went out to sell the Xbox belonging to his girlfriend's son to get money for drugs. Before his relationship with his last girlfriend, whose name was Terry Harris and whose children were called John Bennett and Lacey Bennett, and Lacey Bennett was who the perpetrator raped, and she was 11 at the time. Bendall already had a violent past. He'd been accused of domestic violence by a previous girlfriend of his and had done time in addition for arson. When, early on in their relationship, Terry challenged him over his past, he promised never to hurt her or her children, but according to Terry's mother, Angie Smith, before murdering Terry, he had been behaving abusively towards her for months.
She seemed to watch everything she said around him. He was trying to stop her from coming to see us. Her friends were messaging me saying, we don't hear from her anymore, she doesn't speak to us anymore. My girl was not my girl anymore. He was controlling her.
Do you feel like this whole thing could have been prevented?
Of course he could have, yeah. She wasn't even consulted whether he was allowed to be bailed at her address.
Angie's grief for her daughter and her grandchildren is raw and real.
Lacey was a little ray of sunshine, little poser. John was a real mummy's boy, loved his mum. She loved them kids, them kids were her world. It's just empty now, everything's empty.
Bendall got his whole life order in 2022, but clearly hasn't given up his violent ways. In February 2026, you see, the man got a further life sentence for the attempted murder of a fellow inmate at H&P Frankland, the victim being a man called Michael Mullaney. In a sickening twist to Bendall's attack on Mullaney, the man used the same weapon on Mullaney that he used to murder his pregnant girlfriend, her 2 children, and a friend of one of the children back in 2021. A claw hammer. As you can see, the new life sentence that he's been given won't make the blindest bit of difference to the man's future. He's never getting out of prison anyway. Just to confirm, as a result of his act of attempted murder, Bendall was transferred out of Frankland and over to Wakefield. Louis De Zoysa shot a copper dead in a very police station for reasons that remain a mystery.
You're just going to be searched, mate. You're not under arrest. I just need to search you.
When police stopped
We've had the case of Wayne Couzens, a police officer turned murderer. Now we've got the case of Louis De Zoysa.
At 13, he was diagnosed with autism spectrum disorder. His lawyer argued the shooting was a result of an autistic meltdown.
When, on the 25th of September 2020, down in Croydon, South London, police stopped, searched and arrested 23-year-old data analyst Louis De Zoysa, they found that the man was carrying 7 bullets plus some cannabis. There was one other important thing that the man was carrying, though, that the police somehow missed.
Stand up, mate.
He's been a bit...
Go on.
I think this is it.
I don't understand. Stand up.
So please leave.
What?
Please leave. I think I'm going to pass on.
Okay, listen to me. My name's Matt. I'm the custody officer. Right? I'm in charge. I'm not involved in the investigation. You've been arrested on suspicion of possession of bullets, ammunition, and possession of intent to supply.
Class B.
Class B. Anything else?
No, that's it.
All right. Your detention's not been authorised yet, but I can authorise a search of you under Section 54 of PACE. Stand up. Mate, you're good enough to...
The two shots with which De Zoysa murdered Sergeant Matt Ratana came from the antique revolver that he was carrying on him, but as I say, the police missed it when they searched him on the street. Sergeant Matt Ratana left behind his partner and his child, and at the age of 55, he was only 3 months away from retirement. Of the two further shots that De Zoysa then fired, one got him himself in the neck and caused brain damage, as a result of which he's now in a wheelchair and can't communicate properly. Basically, he can't speak. When, at his sentencing hearing, he tried to use his physical disabilities as an argument for not being given a whole life order, the judge quite rightly pointed out that the man's physical disabilities are his own stupid fault.
On balance, I accept that you are likely to find prison more difficult than a neurotypical prisoner. I take that into account. Your injuries. After shooting Sergeant Matt Ratana twice, you fired 2 more shots. One hit the wall of the cell, mercifully missing the 2 officers who were bravely restraining you. The 4th hit you in the neck. This resulted in bleeding and a blood clot, which travelled to your brain and has caused some damage. It has also resulted in physical problems. It means you now use a wheelchair, and you have real problems with your communication, often using a whiteboard to help you communicate. It is entirely due to your deliberate and voluntary actions that you have those injuries.
De Zoysa got his whole life order in 2023, and then in 2025 his appeal against his whole life order was dismissed. Mark Fellows, once a hitman, always a hitman, even while he's in prison on a forever sentence. The murder of child killer Kyle Bevan at Wakefield Prison, which unravelled on the 5th of November 2025, came less than a month after the murder in the same prison of former Lost Prophets vocalist Ian Watkins. Bevan was doing 28 years for murdering the 2-year-old daughter of his girlfriend in July 2020. The battering that the man perpetrated against Lola James left the toddler with a total of over 100 visible injuries all over her body. Bevan hit the side of Lola's head with such force that it caused air bruising and subdural bleeding in her skull on that side. He shook the little girl's head backwards and forwards so violently that she lost consciousness, the little girl dying from brain damage. On the date mentioned, Lee Newell, Mark Fellows and David Taylor all allegedly battered Bevan to death. For both Newell and Fellows, that makes 3 murders each if they're guilty. For Newell, that makes 2 prison murders if he's guilty. I couldn't find out anything about David Taylor, but he too is a murderer. Fellows is both a giver and receiver of brutality. Known as the Iceman, he was a contract killer from Warrington who, in return for pay, shot dead 2 Northwest drug kingpins, Paul Massey in 2015 and John Kinsella in 2018. He got his whole life order, life without parole, in 2019 and had to be airlifted to hospital later that same year after being viciously attacked by another prisoner with a makeshift blade. After killing a prominent local resident, Ali Harbi Ali asked coppers to put his glasses back on his face for him.
Get it down!
This is the moment in October 2021 when police arrested a young man in a church down in Leigh-on-Sea in Essex, southeast England, for the murder of a prominent local resident.
Allowing you to go in and see
Mate, we've got to stick our instructions as well at the same time. We've got a taser unit 1 minute away, so we're going to go in and
he can go and stand at the door. He's not right there. He can go and stand at the door.
Can you show us, mate? Stay back there. Here on the left.
You can go and stand at the door. Yeah, go on. You can see what's hands. You stand at the side. Yeah?
Mate, drop the knife.
Drop the knife now! Mate, drop that knife! Drop that knife! Drop the knife now! Mate, drop the knife! You can drop it! Mate, listen to me. Drop the knife. Mate, no, it's a... Mate, drop the knife! Drop the knife! Mate, you can drop the... Listen to me. Look, it's only going to go one way. Just drop that knife. Please drop that knife for me. Just drop the knife.
We'll talk about it.
You don't want to do this. Okay?
Mate, just drop the knife.
You can do this.
Mate, taser.
Get up, mate. Yeah, come on, on the floor now. On the floor. Get it down. Take the taser. We got him.
Right, search him.
Right, mate, at the moment you're under arrest for murder, alright? Would you like to say anything? In my arm, your defence, if you do not mention when mentioned something which you later on in court, anything you do say may be given as evidence. Do you understand me?
This now has stabbed. What's the man's name?
David Amos.
David Amos.
AMESS.
Yep.
Because it's been deceased.
Domestic or hate related in any
Terror.
way? Pardon?
Terror. I'd say hate, yeah.
On what basis? Racial, religious?
Religious.
We have been informed that you made a significant comment following your arrest, where you have made the comment, it was terrorist. Is that correct?
I think I said, what's it called? The nature of the crime, I said is terror. I think that's what I said.
Okay.
In the room where, with the lady, when I first came in, just speaking to her. Yeah,
So, the nature of the crime was terror. Okay. Mr. Ali, is this a terrorist attack?
I mean, I guess, yeah, I killed an MP and I've done it. Yeah.
Okay. Have you planned, or were you planning any other terrorist attacks?
No, nothing like that, no.
Okay.
Ali Harbi Ali is an Islamic terrorist. In October 2021, he murdered Conservative MP Sir David Amess. He stabbed him more than 20 times while attending a constituency surgery. Ali pleaded not guilty to murder, but then didn't dispute much of the evidence against him in court. He had also plotted to murder other MPs, all in revenge against those, including Amess, who had voted for airstrikes against Syria. He got his whole life order in 2022. Billy White took her life on the command of God himself, apparently. What has murderer Billy White, plus another prisoner, got to do with murderer Brett Rogers? Brett Rogers first went to prison in 2012 for the attack on his own father that left the man with a broken eye socket. Rogers' second prison sentence was for something a lot more serious. His mother, Gillian Phillips, not having even wanted to let her 23-year-old son back into her home after he got out, the 41 stab wounds and the repeated acts of stamping that the young man inflicted on her in her Essex home in 2015, inevitably claiming her life. Gillian's friend, 60-year-old David Oakes, who was round Gillian's at the time, also got more than 40 stab wounds alongside the severe brain injuries that were caused to him by Rogers' act of stamping on the man's head with force over and over. In other words then, the perpetrator inflicted the same horrific acts of violence on both his victims, his reason for ending their lives remaining unclear. Between April 2010 and March 2012 though, police were called 14 times to Gillian's home where Rogers was living, Gillian having been separated from Rogers' father. A long-term drug user, Rogers had displayed psychotic behaviour, been convicted twice of damaging his parents' properties, repeatedly made threats to kill, and, in the period mentioned, was sectioned twice under the Mental Health Act. On one of the occasions when police were called, it took all of 6 officers to restrain the man. Having been out on licence at the time of his double murder after serving half of his 5-year sentence for his attack on his father, Rogers told the court that the 2 victims were attacked by a mystery stranger while he went out to the supermarket for 5 minutes. In May 2016, the man got life with a minimum of 32 years. When, in June 2017, Billy White, 24, and Gary Lindley, 42, fellow inmates of Rogers at HMP Long Lartin, strangled Rogers to death in his cell, they were freeing him from his darkness. When, in 2015, White murdered his girlfriend, Lucy Aries, by stabbing her in the neck in her sleep. He was high on cannabis and cocaine as well as drunk. The couple, who had been in a volatile 18-month relationship, had enjoyed an evening socialising with friends and having sex before White carried out the brutal murder. The man broke down in tears when he was arrested and sobbed, "I'm sorry," but told detectives later that he couldn't say why he had murdered his girlfriend as it made him feel physically sick. Before murdering Brett Rogers, Gary Lindley, for his part, wasn't a murderer, but his father and brother both were. In 1996, Glenn Lindley, the father, got 15 years for murdering his 19-year-old girlfriend. In 2002, meanwhile, Gary Lindley's half-brother, Glenn Ansell, got the same sentence for fatally stabbing a man called Anthony Monaghan in a drugs-related incident. Lindley himself, though, was doing an indeterminate sentence for his participation in a violent distraction burglary in which he slashed an 82-year-old man in the face. White and Lindley were both called on to murder Brett Rogers by God, the two men, Christian and Muslim respectively, having planned to commit the murder a week before carrying it out, and then, after perpetrating the act, having gone and prayed. Lindley got 17 years, while White, who was already doing life, got a whole life order. And it would seem that the Lord hasn't called on either prisoner to kill anyone else since, because neither has killed again since. The 3 acts of murder committed by Khairi Saadallah are all the more infuriating because the killer was a refugee. A Libyan refugee who came to the UK in 2012, 25-year-old Khairi Saadallah had mental health issues, couldn't stay out of prison, admired Islamic terrorists, and on the 20th of June 2020, stabbed to death 3 total strangers in a park in Reading, Berkshire. Why? Because he wanted to please God, Allah to be exact. Even though Saadallah was from a wealthy family back in Libya, a member of his family reports that the man sought to escape the violence that ravaged his home country, the killer having developed PTSD as a result of their civil war. Between 2015 and 2019, over here in the UK, Saadallah gained 6 convictions relating to as many as 15 crimes, 8 of which having been violent crimes. Sending this refugee back to his home country on account of his criminality, however, would have been a breach of his human rights. A cannabis addict who was radicalised in prison and who was briefly on the radar of MI5, the man had regular visits from a mental health professional. In fact, a day or 2 before he murdered 3 people who were wholly innocent, he spoke to the police about his ongoing therapy sessions, the police having been asked to look into the man's behaviour by none other than the man's brother.
You're feeling a bit down, feeling a bit unwell?
When?
I don't know.
Wait,
No?
Yesterday, yeah.
You were feeling down yesterday. You were supposed to see the crisis team.
I spoke to them, yeah.
You spoke to them. What did you say?
I spoke to them. They say that they're going to bring me back.
They're going to bring you back?
Yeah.
In court, the prosecution described Saadallah's murder of James Furlong, 36, David Wales, 49, and Joe Ritchie Bennett, 39, the 3 men being friends and having all lost their lives in less than a minute at the hands of Saadallah, as, quote, highly effective executions, unquote. They added that as a committed jihadist who, as he killed his 3 victims, was heard to clamour in Arabic, "God is great" and "God accept my jihad." The perpetrator planned the attack with determination and precision, intending to kill as many people as possible. In October 2021, Saadallah was denied permission to appeal his whole life order, which, following his guilty pleas from November 2020, he picked up in his sentencing hearing of January 2021. Marcus Osborne's acts of murder against his former girlfriend and her new boyfriend came at the end of a campaign of harassment and intimidation against his girlfriend for dumping him and going off with someone new. While he didn't lay a finger on his children were very much involved in his horrific act. Osborne killed his former girlfriend and her new partner in 2023, in the month of May in Huddersfield, out of sexual jealousy. His ex-girlfriend, a lady called Katie Highton, who was 27, sustained all of 99 injuries in the attack from Osborne, while her new boyfriend, a guy called Mr. Harnett, was mutilated and left with 24 knife wounds. When I say mutilated, the guy was possibly still alive when Osborne cut off his bleep anus plus part of his scrotum. Osborne also raped another woman who he had held captive in the house. This woman, who we'll call V, testified in court that Osborne washed himself between killings because this ordeal took place over a number of hours, and that the man laughed and jeered at what he'd done, and he scrolled through Katie's social media accounts and played voice messages from her phone between her and Mr. Harnett, whose first name is actually Stephen. Some hours later, the man got a neighbour to come to the house to have a look at the dead bodies, and the neighbour testified that Osborne was literally proud of what he'd done. I said children are involved in this story. All the while that this ordeal was taking place, there were 4 children upstairs. 2 of those children were Osborne's very own, and the mother of all 4 children was Katie. Osborne clearly didn't care about doing what he did while his own 2 children were in the home, never mind while the other 2 children were there as well. Marcus and Katie had been in a relationship for around 5 years. As I mentioned, they had 2 children together, and they all lived together as a family with Katie's 2 children from an earlier relationship. At first, Osborne was good to Katie. However, around 2 years in, he started to become verbally abusive towards her and her children. He started controlling what she wore and what she did, and if things weren't done exactly as he wished and dictated, he would become verbally abusive, and the verbal abuse quickly turned into physical abuse, and that physical abuse became more and more frequent and less predictable over time. The last straw, however, was Osborne's assault on Katie from the 28th of April 2023, which followed an altercation about one of the kids. He hit her around the head, pushed her to the ground and kicked her in the ribs. The physical attack that he was perpetrating against Katie continued upstairs when he punched her in the head and face, and Katie then spent the next few days in bed unable to move. By the 2nd of May, she was physically well enough again to get up and move, and she then left the house and she moved in with a relative until the 12th of May. She changed her Facebook status to single. She declined a large number of messages and phone calls from Osborne. On the 10th of May, the 2 of them exchanged Snapchat messages, and Katie told him that she didn't want to see him. He responded that if he found out that she was, quote, even messaging anyone else, I will end you fully, unquote. Clearly, he wasn't calling her bluff. When, in early 2024, Judge Christina Lambert gave Marcus Osborne his whole life order, she gave the impression that even that wasn't a good enough punishment for him.
This is a case of such exceptional seriousness that even a very long minimum term would not amount to just punishment. What you did that night was horrific.
In March 2024, when he got his whole life order, Osborne was 35, so hopefully he'll have decades and decades of absolute hell rotting in prison. On that point, I'd like you to know that his appeal against his whole life order from November 2024 failed. You know, sexual jealousy can lead a man to commit all sorts of evil, including char grilling 3 innocent kids along with their mother.
Chicken. Yeah. Chicken. Chicken.
You've just watched 40-year-old Sharaz Ali, high on drink and drugs, tell his mate, 26-year-old Callum Sunderland, to kick down the door of the house that they've come to so that he can get inside and torch the place along with everyone in it. These horrific events unravelled on the 21st of August 2024 when Ali went in search of his ex-girlfriend, 28-year-old Antonia Gawith, to make her pay for leaving him. And now, with the lengthy prison term that he got in March 2026, who knows who will make him pay for what he did, which includes murdering all of 3 little kids. In the course of the 7-year relationship between Ali and Antonia, Ali behaved in a coercive and controlling way towards his girlfriend. As regards his frequent physical violence towards her, there was one occasion when he beat her black and blue, and many other occasions when he still beat her up badly, but just a bit less badly. The man's abuse of alcohol and cocaine played a significant part in his behaviour towards his girlfriend. The man also has numerous convictions for offences like drug dealing, assault and kidnap, and at the time of his murderous acts, he was out of prison on licence. Antonia, who had only left Ali a few days before the date in question, was staying with her sister, Bryony, a 29-year-old mother of 3, hers being the home that Ali broke into, and she herself being a target of Ali's murderous revenge, because the man believed that she encouraged her sister to dump him, and Bryony knew he believed that. It was shown in court that Ali knew that the kids would be in, and that he accepted them as potential collateral damage in his revenge mission. On the night of the fatal blaze, Ali recruited Sunderland, who sometimes sold drugs for him, to accompany him to Bryony's home in Westbury Road. The two men filled up a canister with fuel from a petrol station in Keighley, and Ali sent Antonia a series of aggressive messages accusing her of being with someone else. We've seen what the two men did once they reached Bryony's house. In her evidence, Antonia told jurors that she had confronted Ali and tried to wrestle the canister and lighter from his hands before running outside in an attempt to lure him out of the house. Bryony and her 3 children, who were asleep upstairs, were unable to escape. Jurors were told that the children would have likely lost consciousness quickly due to smoke inhalation. Ali, who claimed he had intended to take his own life in the fire, was seriously injured and suffered burns to 80% of his body. Medics initially believed that he wouldn't survive after he was placed in an induced coma for 4 months. A third defendant, Mohammed Shabir, who was said to have driven Ali and Sunderland to Westbury Road, died of a heart attack while in prison on remand. During the trial, Sunderland repeatedly refused to answer questions while he was under cross-examination. A convicted arsonist and drug addict, he claimed he had been enlisted to burn a car and would never have gone if he'd known there were people in the house. He said he and Ali were part of the drug world and that he had bought drugs from him as well as selling drugs on his behalf, but didn't know about his co-defendant's personal life. Sunderland was acquitted of attempting to murder Antonia Gawith and of a charge of attempting to cause her grievous bodily harm. He was no less convicted of 4 counts of manslaughter, the verdict having been announced on the 10th of December 2025 at Doncaster Crown Court, while Ali himself was convicted of 4 counts of murder. Reading a statement on behalf of her family outside court, Antonia said her sister, nieces and nephew's futures had been stolen. Even with justice, nothing will ever make this right. Nothing will ever fill the silence where their laughter should be. Nothing will ever bring back our family. We will forever carry this brokenness, and yet we will hold on to them tightly in the only ways we can now, through our memories, our photos and our precious videos. Those are all we have left now." Unquote. West Yorkshire Police's Detective Chief Inspector Stacey Atkinson said, "Bryony and her children would still be alive today if it wasn't for the horrific and truly callous actions of Ali and Sunderland that day. They left a mum and her 3 children completely helpless whilst her sister and their auntie watched on in horror." Unquote. In March 2026, for 4 counts of manslaughter, Sunderland got 18 years. For his own 4 acts of murder, Sharaz Ali got a whole life order. He's got 2 fingers missing on each hand and needs a wheelchair to go any further than 10 steps because of the injuries that he caused himself with the fire that he started. So he won't be able to put up much of a fight if any one or more of his fellow inmates decides that the man needs a beating. He'll no doubt be on the VP, vulnerable person wing, but since when were such areas impenetrable? Direece Roche burgled his great-uncle's home before stabbing the man himself multiple times, then claimed self-defence. And there's another massive twist to his diabolical story as well. Direece Roche, who was born in June 1994, committed his first murder at the age of 16 in 2011. He and his brother Owen went round to the home of Adam Steele in Salford in Manchester, northwest England. The occasion was New Year's Day. They went round to try to find Owen's girlfriend. There'd been some struggles and tensions between Owen and his girlfriend, and when the brothers turned up to Adam Steele's flat, they demanded to know where the girl or woman was at. That caused an argument that erupted into the street, and Direece Roche, for whatever reason, got out a knife and stabbed Adam Steele to death with it. For that murder, Roche got a life sentence with a minimum of 12 years. His brother, meanwhile, got an indeterminate sentence for manslaughter. 8 years after Roche was sent down, his legal team tried to get him out early. They said he was a reformed character, he had an excellent prison record, and he had raised money for charity. He had cut ties with all his criminal friends, and he was planning on enrolling for a psychology degree. There's no doubt that the judges were very impressed with the progress that Roche had made in prison, but they ultimately refused him early release because they just weren't convinced that he was fully reformed, fully rehabilitated. And we can see now that their scepticism was fully justified. For instance, on day release from HMP Kirkham in Lancashire in May 2023, Roche was found with a lock knife in his bag. He denied knowing anything about it, but in any case, he was released from prison that same year, September 2023. So off Roche went out of prison. Freedom was his again, although he is on licence, or rather was on licence forever, because when you get a life sentence, which you always get for murder, you do whatever your minimum term is, and then when you get out, you're on licence for the rest of your life, which means that you have to live by a strict set of rules, and if you break any of those rules, you can be sent back to prison for any length of time. Knowing that he had his licence hanging over him for the rest of his life, 9 months later, Roche went and murdered his great uncle, Fintan McDwyer. A father and a grandfather, Fintan McDwyer was 64. He lost his wife back in 2005. By the time of his murder, he was retired, and one of his favourite hobbies was taking his beloved dog Sammy for daily walks in his local park. When Direece Roche was little, he knew his great uncle. They would see each other regularly enough, but as Roche got older, his uncle, for whatever reason, fell out of his life. And another important point about Roche is that 3 years before he murdered Adam Steele, which, sorry for not saying this earlier, he did in 2011, he lost his mother. Her name was Samantha Toohey, and she committed suicide in 2008. In the note that she left behind, she said that when she was little, she was essayed by one of her uncles. Fintan McDwyer was one of her uncles, but the fact is, Samantha had 12 other uncles, and she didn't say which one it was, if it was any. Sorry, maybe she was essayed, maybe she wasn't. I personally don't know. So there was no evidence that it was Fintan McDwyer, and after Fintan's murder, the police looked into whether it could have been him, and they couldn't find any evidence to say that it was. So now we're all probably wondering, did Roche believe that that particular great uncle of his, Fintan McDwyer, was the one who had essayed his mother? And if so, was that why he decided to kill his great uncle? Just before killing his great uncle, Roche actually went to visit his mother's grave. She is buried in Southern Cemetery in Chorlton, and then, just a few hours after murdering his great uncle, he went back to her grave again. On the day that Roche murdered his great uncle Fintan was home alone, except for his dog Sammy. His son, Ryan, you see, had gone away to a wedding with his girlfriend. Late at night on the 29th of June 2024, Roche put on a balaclava and other dark clothing. He left his home in Longside and went on foot to the home of his great uncle. He went through people's gardens, and when he got to his great uncle's home, he tried to open a ground floor window to get in. He wasn't able to do so, but then he found a ladder in a nearby garden, and he used it to climb up to his uncle's bedroom window, and he got in that way. And then in a matter of about 90 seconds, he stabbed his great uncle to death, and he stabbed him 77 times. Finton's body was only discovered 2 days later when his son Ryan came home. Police arrested Roche in his home on the 6th of July. It was easy for them to find him because they found DNA on objects that were left near the home of Finton McDwyer, including some blood that was smeared on a fence, because remember, he'd got into his great-uncle's home by climbing through gardens of neighbouring houses. And remember, because Roche is a convicted murderer with a criminal record, his DNA was in the police database. In his police interviews, he told them that he himself, as a child, had been essayed by his great-uncle Finton McDwyer. It turns out, though, that that was the first time he had ever mentioned the matter to anybody. And he said that the reason for that was because beforehand he was too scared to talk about it. Roche also claimed that his great-uncle had told him that his dog Sammy was named after his mother, Samantha Toohey. He said that that link disturbed him and that he decided that he had to steal the dog. Somehow that would stop the idea of the dog being named after his mother disturbing him. And we're all thinking, oh, you went to steal a dog, so you took a great big knife with you. Don't know how big the knife is, but you get the point. But the thing is, Roche denied that he actually owned the knife. He denied he'd carried it with him. He said rather that the knife was his great uncle's and that he had had to wrestle it away from his great uncle. That obviously implies that his great uncle was the one who attacked him. Funnily enough, the court didn't quite believe him, especially considering that Roche had stabbed his uncle 77 times. That is not self-defence. That's a furious, frenzied, ferocious act of murder. On the 19th of September 2025, he was told that he would spend the rest of his life in prison because he was given a whole life order. Shaine March is stupid, misogynistic and murderous. Twice over.
Everything's cool, recorded in the van, sir.
I don't ever want to come up. Keep me in it. Keep me in jail. I want my grave in a jail. Yeah? Yeah! That's me. You see my face? Yeah!
This is the shameless and unrepentant reaction of 46-year-old Shaine March to his arrest for murder. In the early hours of the 22nd of July 2024, over at his girlfriend's flat in Walthamstow, East London, Shaine March picked up a knife and stabbed his very girlfriend, 32-year-old Alana Odysseus, who was the mother of a 2-year-old and was also expecting Shaine March's own baby, and stabbed her at least 19 times, as well as slashing her at least 5 times. Just before 3 a.m, neighbours found Alana outside, bleeding and repeatedly naming March as her attacker. Despite the efforts of her neighbours and then the emergency services, Alana couldn't be saved, the woman being pronounced dead at 3:52 a.m. After Alana died, her daughter, Victoria, was found unharmed inside the flat, the little girl having since become an orphan as her father had died some time before. March had a string of previous convictions for violent offences, the least of which not being the act of murder that he perpetrated in 2000 at the age of 21. 6 months after getting out of prison on licence, which happened in January 2013, he was sent back to prison for stamping on his then partner's belly. Her pregnant belly, if you want to know. Something of a trend with this guy by the look of things. After getting out again in February 2018, the man didn't commit any known further offences until the moment when he stabbed his girlfriend to death. At this point, the perpetrator had only been in a relationship with Alana for about 4 months, and the two had only recently found out that Alana was pregnant, which March was less than happy about, let's say.
She said that the pregnancy, rather than being a source of shared joy, had been the cause of further arguments and tension. March thought that she should have an abortion. Alana's sister, Jasmine, heard some voice notes played to her of conduct by March. He could be heard denying that the unborn child was his and demanding that she should have an abortion.
Alana was vulnerable. She'd suffered serious personal losses, including that of her former partner, Ruslan, Victoria's father, who had committed suicide. She had long since confided in family and friends about the perpetrator's controlling and abusive behaviour towards her, which included both physical violence and emotional violence.
Not long after that relationship began, she began to tell her family and friends that he was coercing and controlling her. She didn't use that technical term, but what she described were classic signs of that condition. She said that she wasn't allowed to talk to people by him, that he would telephone her at all times of the day and night to find out where she was, who she was with, and what she was doing. There were video calls so that he could check where she was by looking at the background. She also said that the relationship was dogged by constant argument. She admitted that she was frightened of him and that said that he had assaulted her. He had smashed a glass in her face and on another occasion had cut her forehead. She did tell her sister that he had accused her of cheating on him and that he had required her to delete the telephone numbers of any male contacts from her phone.
Only hours before her death, Alana had WhatsApped her sister Jasmine and told her about feeling unwell, about the perpetrators acting up, about her pain and her boyfriend's indifference to it, and about her need to protect her little girl Victoria. She told her sister, quote, "Can't help who you love, but he don't love any of us," unquote.
During the evening of the 21st of July 2024, an exchange of messages on WhatsApp took place between Alana and her sister Jasmine, during which Alana was explaining that she was in pain and that he, March, didn't care. She said that she couldn't, quote, do this, close quote. The exchange finished when she said to her sister in a message, quote, "Don't want no one, wanna be alone where I ain't hurt."
Later on that evening, Alana and her boyfriend had a blazing row that eventually spilled out onto the street, the perpetrator taking that opportunity to lock Alana out for a while after subsequently going back inside himself. And keep in mind that this was Alana's two-bed flat. This event took place around midnight on July the 22nd, 2024. Sometime after Alana got back inside, she got into another blazing row with her boyfriend, which took place in the kitchen, and this time it was about the man's trainers. That appears to have been what triggered the perpetrator's murderous act on Alana. What I can't tell you is whether or not the impairment to the man's cognitive function, which was occasioned by the brain injury that he suffered at the age of 17, played any role in the man's act of murder against his girlfriend. Likewise, I can't tell you if that same problem that I've just described played any role in the first murder that he committed back in 2000. After murdering his girlfriend, March went out, dumped 3 phones of his, one of which having later been recovered and having been found to hold 2 voice notes in which the perpetrator admitted to murdering his girlfriend.
"I just killed someone and I need to go back to jail. Mom, I just killed a woman and I'm going back to jail."
Next, the man went to Cream's Cafe, not far away. The employee working that shift called the police after March told him what he'd done. By 5 a.m. then, March was in the back of a police van on his way to the Nick.
"I don't regret nothing. Yeah? Give me the death chamber. Yeah? That's what I want. A lethal injection and put me in my dismiss me. Yeah? Let me just drop this job. Either way, it doesn't bother me. I'm devil's me. Yeah? There's a place for me now in hell. Thank you. Thank you to the kind officers. Thank you. We call this yeah?
Everything's cool, recorded in the van, sir.
I don't ever want to come up. Keep me in there. Keep me in jail. Anyway, I want my grave in a jail. Yeah? Yeah! That's me. You see my face? Yeah!
After eventually pleading guilty to his charge of murder, a guilty plea tending to reduce the sentence, and keep that point in mind, March bunked his sentencing hearing, which took place at the Old Bailey on the 31st of October 2025, Halloween in other words.
You and everyone else in court should understand three things about the minimum term that I am about to impose. First, you must serve every day of it before the parole board can even consider releasing you. Following your arrest for the murder of Elena, you were recalled to prison to continue serving your life sentence for the murder of Andre Drummond. There are therefore no days on remand in custody to be deducted from the minimum term that I must impose. The truth of the matter is that given your age and the length of the minimum term I must impose, it may be that you will never be released from prison, but the chance exists. Shaine March, please stand up. For the murder of Elena Odysseus, I sentence you to life imprisonment with a minimum term to serve of 42 years.
So off March went with at least a vague hope of one day being a free man again, at the age of 89 to be exact, since he was 47 when he got his 42 years. He then lodged an appeal for a sentence reduction in order, of course, to increase his chances of eventual freedom. For her own part, however, the Solicitor General, Ellie Reeves, lodged an appeal of her own, saying that, for reasons that she laid out, March's guilty plea meant nothing and shouldn't then have stopped the man getting a forever sentence, a whole life prison sentence, life without parole. On the 26th of March 2026, the Court of Appeal answered both appeals, and it was a double defeat for March.
It's quite true that even in a case where a whole life order is under consideration, a guilty plea may operate to reduce the seriousness of the offence so that such an order can be avoided. In our judgment, this is clearly not such a case. The plea to murder was entered only when he had no other alternative open to him. The point had come when he had to mount a defence in order to discharge the burden of proof which lay on him if he was to be able to reduce the crime of murder to a crime of manslaughter. He simply had no evidence to offer. In those circumstances, his guilty plea should have attracted no substantial weight at all, and in our judgment, the judge did fall into error by giving it some weight at the point when he was deciding that a whole life order was not required. For all of these reasons, therefore, we refuse leave to appeal against sentence, and that application is dismissed. We grant the Solicitor General leave to this court under Section 36 of the 1988 Act as unduly lenient. We conclude that for the reasons we have given, the sentence was unduly lenient. We quash it. It means that the offender will never be released.
Shaine March will now never become eligible to apply for parole. He's going to be locked up for the rest of his life. Kyle Clifford murdered 3 women out of anger for being dumped, and his choice of weapon was as hideous as it was unusual.
The evidence I have heard shows you to be a jealous man, soaked in self-pity, a man who holds women in utter contempt.
That's putting it mildly, Mr. Justice Benetton. This is the judge who sentenced Kyle Clifford for the 3 horrendous murders that he committed on the 9th of July 2024, his sentencing having come in March 2025. This triple killer is going to cost the taxpayer millions because he's paralysed. That means in prison he needs lots of extra care. He paralysed himself in a failed suicide attempt that he made just before he got arrested for the murder of his ex-girlfriend Louise Hunt, her mother Carol, and another sister in the family, Hannah. He committed those murders in the home of his ex-girlfriend on the 9th of July 2024. In addition, he raped Louise and held her captive for 2 hours before murdering her, and the judge of his trial said it must have become obvious to Louise in the course of her captivity that Clifford had already killed her mother. During his police interview, the perpetrator, of course, showed nothing other than cowardice in combination with contempt for his 3 victims.
Do you accept, Kyle, that based on the evidence, that this is a premeditated murder of 3 people?
No comment.
Do you accept that you have meticulously planned this murder from the moment that you split up Louise?
No comment.
From the moment that she sent you that text message at the end of June, you began to plan her murder? Yes?
No comment.
It's evident quite clearly from your purchase of the crossbow, from your purchase of the additional bolts, from the purchase of the gun and the knife in the 2 weeks leading up to the murders. Do you agree?
No comment.
Do you agree that it shows that you only had one thing in mind, and that planning began when you purchased these items? You purchased rope and you purchased duct tape in order to restrain Louise and Hannah and Carol, didn't you? 5-6 days before this happened, you make these significant purchases that really only have one plausible explanation, didn't you?
No comment.
The only plausible explanation is that they were purchased in order for you to carry out these murders. Do you agree?
No comment.
Clifford is in fact the 2nd murderer in his family. His big brother, Bradley, is, as at the time of this recording, doing 23 years for murdering an 18-year-old man called Soban Khan for breaking the wing mirror of his Ford Mustang. A fanatic of graphically violent videos, after his brother's incarceration, Kyle Clifford joined the army, but please don't think for a minute that the man holds any level of either valour or devotion to his country.
You have been referred to at times as a former soldier. In many cases, that would serve as significant mitigation. Not so in your case, however, as your 2 years in the army included 286 days at home claiming to be ill. You never saw active service, and your utility to the armed forces can be gleaned in a parting comment from your commanding officer that, quote, his character is wholly unsuited to military employment, and he has no care nor concern beyond himself.
The average prisoner costs the taxpayer around 55,000 quid a year. Given all his additional care needs and given how long his sentence is, Clifford, who was 26 when he was sentenced, stands, as I mentioned earlier, to cost the taxpayer an absolute fortune.
This is no occasion to subject the family and friends of your victims to any delay or suspense. I therefore make clear at once that for each of these 3 murders, the sentence will be one of life imprisonment with a whole life order. That means a sentence from which you will never be released.
Steven Sansom's first murder was shocking and horrific enough, unless taking someone's life for pocket change makes sense to you. And as for his second murder... On Christmas Eve 1998, at the age of 19, Steven Sansom got into a minicab, got to his destination, then got out the 12cm kitchen knife that he'd brought with him and plunged it so far into the neck of the driver, whose name I couldn't trace, that it reached the bone of the man's cervical spine. This was the fatal wound of all those that Sansom inflicted on his victim, including ones to the man's ear, throat and shoulder, plus the defensive wounds that the man sustained to his hands. Having left the scene, he then returned to the vehicle and cut the cable to the radio microphone to ensure that the dying man couldn't call for help. And this was all for the 25 quid that the perpetrator had found in the driver's wallet, which he had stolen. Sansom was released on licence in December 2019 after serving more than 20 years for both murder and robbery, the man having pleaded guilty to both charges. Sansom had briefly dated 38-year-old Sarah Mayhew, who was mother to a 12-year-old and a 15-year-old, years before he and Gemma Watts took her life. Sarah is how Sansom met Gemma. I'll call Gemma Watts, thank you. She introduced the two to one another in the summer of 2023 and the two started hooking up. Sansom and Watts were from Croydon in South London. At the point when Watts started suggesting that she and Sansom should take their shared love of BDSM, a mutual trait that each had discovered in the other early on, to the level of killing a woman and then having sex together with Sansom covered in the woman's blood, for instance. Watts knew that Sansom was out on licence for murder and that he had, as such, the capacity to fulfil her fantasy. Sansom's WhatsApp message to Watts from the 11th of September 2023, which said, quote, "Everything looks like meat now, don't they? A plaything, something to cut, something to bleed. They all look different now," unquote. Leaves us in no doubt as to his own enthusiasm for this idea, he and Watts subsequently discussing cannibalising their victim and suggesting how the person would taste. By November 2023, Watts was anticipating getting Sarah to come to Sansom's flat and cutting her throat. When Sansom replied that he would try to get Sarah to come round if that was what Watts wanted, Watts answered, quote, "Only if it's a deal that she's not leaving in one piece," unquote. The conversation that followed included Sansom saying that he could slit Sarah's throat over Watts' face. The conversation after that turned to whether Sansom had the tools, to which Watts replied, quote, "Great minds think alike," unquote. I said Watts replied, I would say rather it was Sansom who replied that. While it took a lot of coaxing from Sansom to get Sarah to stop by, when Sarah finally agreed to come over, her visit coming on the 8th of March 2024, she'd been expecting a night of sex and drugs. She was never seen again. On the 10th of March, Sansom got busy on Sarah's body with the hacksaw and the other tools that he had bought that very morning, and soon enough, Sarah's body was sitting in a set of bags and in a suitcase awaiting removal. Having murdered Sarah 2 days before, you see, Sansom and Watts were only preparing to get rid of her body now. Between April and May 2024, Sarah's body parts began turning up in areas of South London, Roden and Mitcham, both being very close to Croydon, being the main two places that Sarah's killers used as dumping sites. Other than taking Sarah's life, what Watts and Sansom did to Sarah just isn't known. Neither Sansom nor Watts would say, and with the decomposition and dismemberment of the body, the pathologist couldn't trace the harm inflicted on Sarah. At the sentencing hearing of the two perpetrators, which took place in January 2025, the judge condemned the two killers' lack of remorse, citing words from a letter from Watts to Sansom in which she said, "Love lasts, my evil twin."
You, Watts, later confessed to the killing at the police station on 8th April following your arrest, saying she deserved it anyway, dirty crackhead. You told a registrar at hospital that you had killed someone before saying, "I was there anyway." You, Watts, were not just there. You had, together with Sansom, instigated, discussed, and carried out a plan to kill another for your own depraved sexual gratification. On 15th April 2024, you told a member of staff at Bronzefield Prison that it was you who'd cut Sarah's throat with a knife. Contrary to your attempts to justify what you had done, there was nothing that Sarah did to deserve what happened to her. She was an innocent woman, lured to that flat to die, in order that you both could act out your bloodthirsty and wicked fantasies. You took a woman from her children who must now grow up without her love and support. You took a much-loved daughter from her parents, who describe her as a bubbly, chatty and funny person. On the 9th of March, when Sarah's body must still have been inside the flat, you carried on as normal. A neighbour describes you, Sansom, as chirpy when he saw you outside your flat. You, Watts, had taken your dog for a walk and greeted that neighbour. You have never showed any distaste or remorse for what you have done. Rather, you joked in messages in March and again in early May about disposing of someone in a suitcase.
As a first-time murderer, Watts got life with a minimum of 30 years. As a second-time murderer, Sansom got a whole life sentence. He's seen life as a free man for the last time. Brian Whitelock is a classic example of what can go wrong when a killer meets a good Samaritan. Brian Whitelock's career as a killer began on the 13th of October 2000 when, aged 33, he was hanging out with his brother Glenn, aged 27, and their friend Nicholas Morgan, aged 29, over at Glenn's. This was in Swansea in Wales, and this was, by all accounts, a drink and drugs party. In response to an alleged argument that unravelled at some point between Whitelock and Nicholas, Whitelock literally hammered Nicholas to death, bringing his weapon down on his victim's head and face repeatedly, even after the man was dead. When he then placed a blonde wig that he got from somewhere in the house on Nicholas's head, he didn't seem to mind that his victim's skull was totally caved in, or that, having already overkilled his former friend, he clearly wanted to keep humiliating him. I don't know what Glenn was doing while his brother was killing Nicholas, but when Whitelock, who had since gone out to buy petrol to torch his brother's house to conceal his crime, got back, his brother had passed out. After nicking all of £1,000 in cash of Glenn's from somewhere in the house, which Glenn had made from his dodgy cigarette-selling side hustle, and after clearly not giving a toss whether his brother would die in the fire that he then set, he scarpered off to the pub. The 10 years that Whitelock got for his brother's manslaughter ran concurrently with the 18 years that he got for Nicholas's murder, the killer having been caught almost straight away. Whitelock's first period of parole, which came in January 2019, came to an end virtually 2 years later, December 2020, when he assaulted a security guard at a shopping centre while both drunk and high, Valium having been the substance that he had consumed both on that occasion and on the occasion of his first 2 killings. He stayed on the Valium and on the booze after his second release from prison, which came in October 2021, the parole board having deemed the man a low-risk offender. Whitelock funded his addictions, in part at least, with the odd jobs that he often did for an elderly neighbour of his down in Swansea again by the name of Wendy Buckney. He'd grown quite close to Wendy, and he described her to others as his second mother. For her own part, having 2 stepsons that she totally cherished, Wendy was from a large extended family who expressed to her their serious concerns about her allowing an ex-con into her life. Wendy, however, readily rebuffed the words of warning coming from her loved ones, saying that everyone deserved a second chance. As we know, however, Whitelock was, at this point, actually on his 3rd chance, and I'll tell you now that Wendy's horrific murder was 100% preventable. Whitelock breached the conditions of his licence repeatedly, for instance, by entering prohibited parts of Swansea and, of course, by drinking and taking Valium. In August of 2022 itself, the month when Whitelock savaged Wendy, the man had had both the police and the ambulance service called on him multiple times for ranting and raving in the street due to being severely under the influence. The police, though, just kept letting him go, and the probation service, who were, I think, notified of Whitelock's many licence violations, did nothing. On the 22nd of August 2022, on having Wendy trustingly let him into her home, Whitelock used a knife, a broken table leg and some MDF shelving from her house to stab and beat Wendy all over her body and face. His act of stripping both Wendy and himself naked led the judge to conclude that there had been a sexual element to the man's savage attack on his neighbour. The pathologist defined 70 injuries from head to toe with Wendy's body, but affirmed that there were numerous others and that he simply couldn't keep count. Parts of Wendy's body had been skinned. Her nose, her upper lip and her underlying cheek were partly detached. There was an injury to the back of the left side of her head, which left the bone of her skull exposed. There was bleeding to the white of her eyes. Her arms had fatty tissue and muscle exposed. Some of the weapons that Whitelock had used on her left marks on her body which showed their shape. Likewise, splinters of wood and other materials were embedded in some parts of her body. Her left cheekbone was fractured into 3 pieces and her right leg was broken. Her body was found face down on the floor with clothes and other objects heaped on top of it. Her sofa was standing upended while bits of her flesh were later found attached to the wall and ceiling. Whitelock reports that his elderly, overweight and slightly disabled victim had begged him to stop, but that he'd ignored her.
All the warning signs were there. You injured your own head when you fell over and hit it against a tree, and you were taken to hospital on the 1st of August. Later that month, you were found raving on a bridge and taken to hospital again on the 16th of August. You injured yourself a second time when you were screaming and shouting and out of control in hospital under police supervision on the 16th of August. You randomly trashed your own flat. You were mumbling and incoherent. You were not an addict, but you were hell-bent on consuming drugs and alcohol, knowing full well how dangerous this made you. All your inhibitions were swept away, and what was left was the explosively violent man inside you. I make it clear that your mental state when you murdered Wendy Buckney was caused by your voluntary intoxication. You yourself told people afterwards that she was begging you to stop. You described it as torture, and that is what it was. You also referred to lying on top of her, and when you started to blame unknown strange men for the assaults you had yourself inflicted, you referred to them as having raped her. The forensic evidence shows that you did not ejaculate over or in her, but a trace element of old sperm found its way from your boxer shorts to her low vaginal area. There is no doubt that there was a sexual element to the pleasure you took in your attack.
The jury in the man's trial found the man guilty in November 2024 after a mere 6 minutes of deliberations. On the 20th of December 2024, Whitelock got his whole life prison sentence. Possibly not the sort of Christmas present that he'd had in mind. Not that murder usually comes with an acceptable reason, generally speaking, but the 4 murders committed by Dale Cregan literally came from nothing. Coming from Manchester, in May 2012 he murdered 23-year-old Mark Short over something really petty that started in a pub, and then in August 2012 he murdered the father of Mark Short, David Short, who was aged 46. When the coppers started questioning him and his family about the 2 murders, the man decided to play a rather nasty trick on them. Fiona Bone, 32, and Nicola Hughes, 23, were out on a routine patrol on the 18th of September 2012 when they were sent to Abbey Gardens in Hattersley, Tameside in Greater Manchester. This was at about 11 a.m. and it was in response to a report of criminal damage. Someone had phoned up and said that some random person had thrown a pavement slab through their window. The person making that call was, of course, Dale Cregan, who was already known to the police as a gangster, and this was well before he was suspected of being behind the murders of the Shorts. But of course, the person taking the call didn't know who it was at the time.
Police emergency.
Someone just threw a big concrete slab through my back window and ran off.
Of the house or a car? What are we talking?
No, sorry, my back window in the house.
In the house. What's the address there, please?
30 Abbey Gardens, Mosham.
Did you see them?
Seen one, yeah.
Do you know them?
No, I don't know.
Okay. Do you know why they've done it?
I haven't got a clue.
Okay. Is it a rear window, did you say?
Yeah, it's in the back garden.
So it's just happened prior to your ringing, has it, yeah?
Yeah.
And it's a piece of concrete, yeah?
Yeah, it's a piece of concrete at the corner of a paving stone.
Your name, please?
Adam.
What's your second name, Adam?
Archery. Oh.
You sound as bad as I do.
Yeah.
Right, I'll get an officer up there, have a look round, see if they can see anybody similar, and then they'll come and see you. Alright, Adam?
How long would it take? Do you know roughly? I know that it's not that serious. But...
Well, because it's just happened, it's gone in on the priority, so that's within the hour, certainly. But
okay.
They'll try and get up there as soon as, if there's a possibility he's still knocking about.
Alright then, thanks very much.
Okay.
I'll wait, I'll be waiting. Alright,
Adam.
Alright,
bye.
bye.
Bye-bye.
When Miss Bone and Miss Hughes turned up to Cregan's home, he opened fire on them, he shot at them, he threw a grenade at them. Fiona Bone died at the scene, while Nicola Hughes was badly wounded and died later in hospital. To clarify why Cregan did what he did, he said that it was because the police had been hounding his family. They had been questioning both Cregan and his family, as I mentioned earlier, in connection to the murder of the Shorts. About an hour after doing what he did to Nicola Hughes and Fiona Bone, Cregan went and handed himself in to the police and told them what he'd done. Paradoxically though, a few weeks later, he pleaded not guilty to the murders of those two police officers. But then in February 2013 in court, he changed his plea from not guilty to guilty. And likewise in May 2013, he pleaded guilty to the murders of father and son, David and Mark Short. In June 2013, Cregan got his whole life order for the 4 murders of which he'd been convicted. In the first of his 4 murders, our next antagonist got the police to act as undertakers, clearing away the dead body for him.
Were you involved in administering any drugs or poisons or noxious substances to him?
No, I don't administer drugs to anyone or give drugs to anyone. That's done at the party boy.
Stephen Port, who was born in 1975, is not only a serial killer but also a serial rapist. Between 2014 and 2015, Port murdered 4 young men that he met online. He'd get them to come over to his flat over in Barking in East London, and there he would drug them with GHB, gamma hydroxybutyric acid, quite a well-known date grape drug, and then of course grape them. And all 4 victims died from an overdose of the drug. In the case of one victim, Paul inserted the drug, or rather injected it, directly into the man's you-know-what hole.
So did you have any involvement in the death of the male that we just spoke about a short while ago, Gabriel Klein?
No, I did not.
At all. Were you involved in administering any drugs or poisons or noxious substances to him?
No, I don't administer drugs to anyone or give drugs to anyone. That's done at the party boy.
Might help if I show you a picture. I'll call this CRT 2. This is Jack Taylor. Do you recognise that, mate?
No. No, I just don't recognise him. I don't pay full attention to the guy's faces when I have paid attention to the parties of this, but I don't recognise his face.
So you don't recognise his face?
I do not know, no.
And I mean, that's Jack Taylor, so you don't recognise
No, I don't.
Jack Taylor?
No.
Port reported the death of his first victim to police himself, pretending that he'd just found the victim, student Anthony Walgate, slumped outside his block of flats over in Barking, East London. Soon afterwards, though, he admitted that he'd hooked up with Anthony, but claimed that the young man had accidentally overdosed on self-administered GHB. The police didn't challenge this claim of Port, and even though they no less seized the perpetrator's computer, they didn't discover Port's online searches for the date grape drugs that he loved using and graping unconscious boys, searches that the man made just before hooking up with Anthony, because they didn't bother checking the computer. As regards Port's third victim, Daniel Whitworth, performing a forensic analysis of the bedsheet, which belonged of course to Port, that had been left with Daniel's body, would have led the police straight to Port since they had Port's DNA in their database. The police, however, failed to carry out one such forensic analysis. It took Port's fourth murder for the police to start investigating the series of murders. Port's fourth victim, 25-year-old Jack Taylor, having two sisters who did some diligent investigating of their own into their brother's murder, and who eventually got the police to actually do their job. Port got his whole life order in 2016. To this day, though, he apparently denies being a murderer. Even when you've had a comfortable and happy upbringing, you can still become a madwoman who randomly kills 3 people for fun.
Looks good.
Thanks, Matt. That makes me feel so good. Real sexy.
This woman has just been arrested on suspicion of 3 murders and 2 attempted murders, and yet she's laughing and flirting with police officers, acting as if she's just been arrested for something like stealing a charger.
Not a t-shirt, it's a tent.
Joanne, signature from you that we've got your property.
Right, so what am I up for? Attempted murder and murder.
You've been arrested on suspicion of attempted murder and murder.
Attempted murder and murder, it's nothing. So going down for Sunday Rose. Excuse me.
This is, of course, the second of the 2 women whole lifers that I'm presenting to you, and 2, as I say, of the only 3 women doing a whole life order in the UK. This woman's story will leave you flabbergasted. The 3 men that Joanna Dennehy murdered in March 2013 were none other than her friends, her sexual partners to be exact. When she was little, Joanna Dennehy was a very kind, caring, sensitive girl, very close to her sister. She was a very academically gifted pupil who had aspirations of becoming a lawyer, until one day in her teens, for reasons that people just can't explain, she changed. She got into drugs, she got into drink, she got into sex. She ran off with a bloke who was a lot older than her that she came onto, had a couple of babies with him. Then that relationship broke down. She went to prison, came out, got in with some really, really dodgy characters, and then in March 2013 killed 3 people and tried to kill another 2. She said that the reason she did it is because she wanted to see if she was as evil and as cold-hearted as she thought she was, and that after she killed the first person, she had to keep going. It was moreish and she couldn't get enough. She was convicted in 2014 along with the 3 men, her so-called undertakers that had helped her, in particular by getting rid of the bodies. And in fact, Joanna Dennehy's killings were known as the Peterborough ditch murders because they dumped the bodies in a ditch out in Peterborough in Cambridgeshire. The 3 accomplices were given finite terms, and I think at least one of them has since been released. Dennehy herself got her whole life order in 2014. While she was on remand before the trial, Dennehy was housed in segregation at HMP Bronzefield, a Category A prison in Surrey, South East England. Prison staff found an escape plot in her diary at this point, which involved killing or seriously injuring a prison officer, cutting off one of the officer's fingers and using the amputated finger to fool the biometric system in the prison. Because of the plot, Dennehy was placed in solitary confinement from September 2013 to September 2015. She claimed that her isolation left her tearful and upset and led her to self-harm. In 2018, the woman requested permission to marry her cellmate, Hayley Palmer, much to the dismay of Palmer's family, who feared that Dennehy might endanger her. In 2018, both Dennehy and Palmer tried to kill themselves in a suicide pact, but failed. In June 2020, Dennehy was reported to be in a relationship with another prisoner, Emma Aitken, a 25-year-old who was serving a 12-year sentence for her part in the murder of a man whose body was dumped outside a social club. In May 2021, it was again reported that Dennehy and Palmer, the latter having since been released from her sentence, which was for robbery, intended to get married. In 2019, Dennehy was moved to Low Newton Prison in County Durham. On her arrival, she allegedly threatened to kill Rosemary West, the UK's only other female whole-life order prisoner besides Joanna Dennehy and Lucy Letby. As a result, West, who, as I record this, is receiving end-of-life care, was moved to another prison. The government, though, denied that Dennehy had threatened to kill the woman. Hacking a soldier to bits on the street in broad daylight in front of multiple passers-by. Together with his accomplice, that's what our next antagonist did. On the afternoon of the 22nd of May 2013, a British Army soldier, drummer Lee Rigby of the Royal Regiment of Fusiliers, was attacked and killed by Michael Adebolajo and Michael Adebowale near the Royal Artillery Barracks in Woolwich, south-east London. Both men were Muslim converts, and their murder of Lee Rigby was an act of protest against the atrocities, as they saw them, being committed by the British Army against citizens of Muslim countries. 29-year-old Adebolajo was found guilty of Mr Rigby's murder on the 19th of December 2013, and so was Adebowale. Adebolajo, however, held a greater share of liability for the murder of father of one Mr Rigby, such as is reflected in his sentence compared to that of Adebowale, the sentence details coming soon. The youngest of Adebolajo's 6 children, a little girl, was but 4 days old when, alongside an accomplice, her father went and ran over an innocent man who happened to be in the army before hacking him to death with knives and with a cleaver. In response to the arrival, around 5 minutes later, of armed police officers, the 2 murderous maniacs, who were armed with a gun as well as with the said bladed articles, charged at the police. As a result of the gunfire that they each suffered from the police, the 2 killers were hospitalised, Adebowale having had one of his thumbs shot off. In contrast, and thankfully, no police officers were harmed. The calm and coherent way in which Adebolajo explained during his first court appearance his motives for his horrific act, revenge for the killing of Muslims overseas by British soldiers, as I mentioned earlier, offered a stark contrast to the notably stilted but no less bravado-laden speaking that he did in his police interview.
We decided to wait in the vicinity of the barracks that is in Woolwich. By the qadr of Allah, by Allah's decree, whilst waiting to find a soldier, because between us we decided that the soldier is the most fair target, because he joins the army with kind of an understanding that your life is at risk when you join the army, you know. So we sat in wait, and it just so happened that he was the soldier that was spotted first.
On the 26th of February 2014, at the Old Bailey, Adebowale got life with a minimum of 45 years, while Adebolajo got his whole life order. In a rather shocking piece of news, 4 years later, Adebolajo expressed regret for doing what he did to Lee Rigby. He said his justification for his act, coming as it did from the Quran, was a misinterpretation of the Quran and that he'd been brainwashed. Lee Rigby's mother, though, whose name is Lynn Rigby, rejected his apology and said that she'd never forgive him. Repaying the kindness of shelter with murder. That's our next case. In the early hours of the 20th of January 2013, 33-year-old Anwar Rosser, an ex-soldier, murdered a 4-year-old boy by the name of Riley Turner up in Keighley, West Yorkshire. Riley was the son of a couple, Sharon Smith and Guy Earwaker, who were friends with Rosser, the perpetrator carrying out the murder in the couple's very home after they let him stay the night. Sharon and Guy had met Ross through a mutual friend and had treated him with kindness during the time that they had known him, even helping him to furnish his own flat. On the night of the 19th of January 2013, Rosser turned up at the couple's home drunk, but fully coherent and in control of his actions, with 2 women. After the women left, he asked to stay the night, claiming that there were people outside waiting to beat him up as he owed them money. When the couple agreed to let him sleep on their sofa, they didn't know that he was carrying a knife that he had stolen from a pub where he worked as a part-time chef. When, around 4 a.m, the man went upstairs, entered the bedroom of the couple's 4-year-old son and repeatedly stabbed him, however, he was carrying a further 3 knives which came from the kitchen. At around 4:30 a.m, Sharon woke up to find Rosser at the side of her bed, curled up into a ball with his head down. She woke Guy, who duly ordered the man straight out of the house, the perpetrator responding by hastily leaving the room and going downstairs, but choosing not to leave but to wait for the couple to discover what he'd done to their little boy. That happened a few minutes later. There were 30 separate stab and incised wounds to multiple parts of Riley's body. These included 14 stab and incised wounds to the neck, including a large stab wound to the centre of the neck, which penetrated deeply and severed the windpipe. 2 additional stab wounds penetrated deeply into that large wound and partially severed his spine. In addition, there were 5 stab wounds to the back, 5 stab wounds to the chest, which penetrated the lungs, one of which completely transfixing the lung, 6 stab wounds to the abdomen, and 1 stab wound to the left side of the scrotum, which was deep and severe. There was also evidence that repeated rectal insertions had been performed, which were associated with multiple penetrating injuries to the bowel wall. They were associated with some significant hemorrhage into the adjacent tissues, which indicated that Rosser inflicted them while the little boy was alive or near the time of his death, or at the time of his death. A marker pen was found within the boy's rectum, and a coat hanger, which was later recovered and which had traces of his faeces and blood, had been inserted into the little boy's bottom hole as well to a substantial depth. In addition, there was a deep bite mark on the outside of Riley's upper left thigh, coming of course from Rosser. Having enlisted into the 5th Regiment Royal Artillery at the age of 16, but never having seen active service, Rosser had a history of alcohol-inspired violence. But when he butchered 4-year-old Riley Turner, despite being drunk, he was in full control of his behaviour. The reason for his murderous assault on the little boy remains, as such, a mystery. The extreme and devastating betrayal of the kindness that the boy's parents had shown the perpetrator was a substantial aggravating factor in the man's sentencing. Rosser got his whole life order at Bradford Crown Court in February 2014. In Christmas 2015, EastEnders actress Sian Blake plus her 2 little boys were murdered in their home. Can you work out who by? Just before Christmas of 2015, Arthur Simpson-Kent murdered his partner, a former actress by the name of Sian Blake, along with their 2 little boys. Sian was born in Walthamstow, East London on the 14th of September 1972. After graduating from Guildford School of Acting down in Surrey, Sian soon landed her most famous role, soul singer Frankie Pierre, a character who appeared in EastEnders from 1996 to 1997. Do you remember her? She came between Alan Jackson and his wife Carol, and then she dumped the character of Alan.
What are you doing here anyway? Why aren't you catching up in your sleep?
A mixed sofa's not exactly the most comfortable place in the world.
And go home to your own bed.
Is that what you want me to do?
I don't give a toss what you do, Alan.
So you wouldn't mind if I moved back in here?
Well, that's what we're leading up to, is it? Well, yes, I would mind about that.
There's someone else lined up.
None of your business if there was.
Who is it?
Just shut up, will you?
It's not Ian, is it? We don't get much fun out of him. You see, you get your kicks from tearing people apart. He doesn't have a marriage to wreck.
I didn't wreck your marriage. You did that all by yourself.
Yeah, with a little help from my friends.
I only encouraged you to do what you really wanted to.
Why are you doing this to me, Frankie?
Because I'm sick of people going on at me.
It's not going on. It's because I actually care about you.
Then stop it, all right? I don't need that sort of care. And if I want to see anyone, including Ian Bill, then I will.
You might find he's got his own opinion about that. You see, he's not as much of a mug as me. On the other hand, maybe you deserve each other.
After abandoning her acting career, the reasons for which I'm about to present, Sian went on to become a sign language teacher and interpreter. Sian met her partner, Arthur Simpson-Kent, when he worked as a hairdresser in the acting industry. Having also had a limited career as a model, Simpson-Kent subsequently stepped away from the showbiz world, like Sian herself, and took to painting and decorating to earn a living. The couple's first son, Zachary, was born in 2007, while their second son, Amon, came along in 2011. Simpson-Kent was a bully. He felt emasculated by the fact that, despite earning some money as a painter and decorator, his family relied principally on the earnings of his partner. With his coercive, controlling behaviour, he drastically reduced Sian's regular visits to her mother with their boys, while all but isolating Sian from her two sisters. Due to their father's view on school as an intrusion in people's lives, Zachary and Amon had never set foot in a school, getting, instead, the best home education that their mother could offer them. Motor neurone disease is a rare neurological condition that progressively damages parts of the nervous system, leading to muscle weakness, visible wasting and loss of function. Also known as amyotrophic lateral sclerosis, it occurs when nerve cells called motor neurons stop working properly, which affects how a person walks, talks, eats, drinks and breathes, and ultimately causes death. After first showing symptoms of this condition in September 2013, by December 2015, Sian was unable to use her hands properly and could barely walk. Her formal diagnosis of this condition, in which it was made clear to her that it was terminal, coming on the 11th of December 2015. Despite her abysmal diagnosis, Sian shared with her family her plan to leave Simpson-Kent and to take her children with her. Sadly, her partner soon found out about her plans. In response, on the night of the 14th to the 15th of December 2015, the man whacked Sian on the head several times with none other than an axe, before going upstairs and doing the same to his two sons. The man then got a knife from the kitchen and cut the throats of his three victims to ensure that they were dead. He then took flight to Ghana, his home country. He was arrested there in January of 2016, but ended up not only returning to the UK on a voluntary basis in February 2016, but also pleading guilty to his 3 murders, sparing the need for a trial, the one mercy that he granted the family of Sian Blake. Simpson-Kent got his whole life order in October 2016. Before Jamie Reynolds committed his act of murder, he was basically known by social services and by the police as a flipping psycho. The act of murder perpetrated by 22-year-old Jamie Reynolds, a shop worker from Shropshire in the West Midlands, against 17-year-old Georgia Williams, a policeman's daughter, on the 26th of May 2013, came from the antagonist's long-held sexual fantasies and their long-planned moment of fulfilment. Reynolds dreamed of, and planned and fulfilled, a scenario in which, after hanging a girl until she died, he would indulge in necro-thingy with her corpse. In preparation for these acts, the perpetrator bought the clothing in which the girl would be dressed, the rope that he would use to hang her, and the handcuffs with which he would restrain her and make her helpless. Likewise, he built a hanging mechanism from the loft aperture in his home, the noose being slung over an oar placed across the opening and tied at one end to the banisters. When the man invited Georgia, his friend, over to his home on the pretext of having her do a photo shoot with him, this coming when his parents went away for a week, Georgia willingly accepted. She fully trusted him then when he persuaded her to dress in the clothes that he had bought, to stand on a box underneath the loft aperture, to have the noose placed around her neck, and to submit to being restrained by the use of handcuffs while he photographed her over and over. Sometime in, Reynolds suddenly pulled the noose tight, using considerable force to do so, securing Georgia's death by hanging, by forcing her backwards, using his knee in her back as a lever, and, no doubt, kicking away the box on which she'd been standing. He then, as he had envisaged, enjoyed the spectacle of her final ghastly minutes as she struggled for life, knowing that she had been betrayed and that she was facing death. Minutes later, he was taking photographs of his victim lying dead on a bed, and then he was taking further photographs of his acts of essay on the body. He then spent an hour repeatedly graping the body before transporting it downstairs into the living room, where he then spent the next few hours violating it time and again. He photographed himself naked with the similarly naked corpse several times. During the immediate aftermath, furthermore, while taking photographs of Georgia's body, the perpetrator had the presence of mind to communicate with two other young women who he had lined up as prospective victims, to cancel arrangements for them to come to his house the following day, no doubt for the same purpose. The antagonist had somehow managed to obtain the password to Georgia's phone and, after murdering her, he used it to text her mother from her phone in an elaborate deceit to give the impression that she had left his home voluntarily and safely and had gone somewhere else for the night. He repeated this act a number of times, his final text to Georgia's mother containing what can only be described as a veiled reference to what he had done to Georgia. This wasn't just about buying himself time to escape. It was about playing games with Georgia's family, feeling powerful against them by doing so, and deriving an enormous sense of satisfaction and sadistic pleasure from that. After being arrested up in Glasgow in Scotland 6 days later, because that's where he scarpered after dumping Georgia's body in a remote area near Wrexham in North Wales, Reynolds denied guilt for Georgia's murder all the way up to the 2nd of December of that same year, 2013, day one of his trial, when he changed his plea to guilty. When Reynolds did what he did to Georgia, he had on his computer 16,800 images and 72 videos, all depicting violent you-know-whatography. Some of the images were of Georgia and of other girls that he knew, with a noose digitally added to their necks. Reynolds had actually long since become known to police for his violent behaviour, having tried in 2008 to strangle a girl and then going on in 2011 to drive his car into that of a girl who had rejected his advances. While both these acts of Reynolds were reported to police, nothing much happened to the man, despite the fact that both the Justice Liaison Service and the police themselves had had notice of the violent you-know-whatography that Reynolds had viewed. The two said agencies just didn't take the matter sufficiently seriously, and the girls, all of whom the killer knew, including Georgia herself, weren't warned. Several agencies were involved with Reynolds, in fact, but there was no coordinated approach to managing him or monitoring him, and consequently, not only were the people in the man's life unaware of the man's disturbing acts and interests, the man was largely left to his own devices. In the aftermath of the man's conviction for the murder of Georgia Williams, media sources stated that the murder could have been prevented if police and social services had acted on information that they had received about Reynolds, which would have led to him being monitored and potentially registered as a sex offender when at liberty, even if he hadn't been jailed for those offences. For his own part, Mr. Justice Wilkie, who was in charge of Reynolds' trial, said the young man, quote, had the potential to progress into become a serial killer, unquote, and was likely to remain a danger to women for the rest of his life. These assertions of his came from the psychiatrist reports provided to him ahead of the perpetrator's sentencing hearing. On the 19th of December 2013, Reynolds got a whole life prison sentence, also known as a whole life order. He's never getting out, and he is the second youngest person ever to get that sentence. Shooting and stabbing an MP to death on the street in broad daylight because she didn't share his hatred. Don't miss the story of horror of Thomas Mair. On the 16th of June 2016, during the Brexit referendum, Jo Cox, Labour MP for Batley and Spen, was shot and stabbed multiple times in Birstall, West Yorkshire, by 53-year-old Thomas Mair. Mair was anti-immigration, anti-EU and anti-absolutely everything that wasn't both white and British. And while he shot and stabbed his victim, he called out, "This is for Britain! Keep Britain independent! Britain first!" His act of murder came from his thoroughly researched assassination plan, which included his act of acquiring the firearm that he used, where he got it from being a mystery even today. While Mair, an unemployed gardener from Scotland, was deemed sane at the moment of his act of murder against Jo Cox, who left behind a husband and 2 small children, he had a history of mental health problems. As a matter of fact, the evening before his act of murder, the man visited a treatment centre in Birstall seeking help for depression. He was told to return for an appointment the next day. Mair believed that individuals of liberal and left-wing political viewpoints, along with the mainstream media, were the cause of the world's problems. The Guardian newspaper suggested, for its part, that the man targeted Jo Cox, a passionate defender of the EU and of immigration, because he saw her as one of the collaborators and a traitor to white people. In Mair's home, police found Nazi regalia, far-right publications and information on the construction of bombs. Mair had an association with a multitude of far-right groups, both from the UK and from the USA, had attended far-right gatherings and wanted to see apartheid reintroduced to South Africa. On the 18th of June 2016, when he was asked to confirm his name in Westminster Magistrates Court, the man said, "My name is Death to Traitors, Freedom for Britain." His lawyer said there was no indication of how he would plead. The man was remanded in custody and the magistrate suggested that he should be seen by a psychiatrist. And then, at a bail hearing on the 20th of June, the judge remanded Mair in custody until the point when a hearing could be held under terrorism-related protocols. At the next hearing, which came on the 23rd of June, the judge said that the case would be handled as part of the terrorism case management list, on which cases related to terrorism, as defined by the Terrorism Act 2000, are always placed. At a September 2016 hearing, Mair's lawyers said that they weren't going to advance a diminished responsibility argument. And then at another hearing the following month, Mair, who appeared by video link, refused to enter a plea, so because of that, the judge entered not guilty pleas on the man's behalf. Mair's trial began at the Old Bailey on the 14th of November 2016. The man made no attempt to defend himself and was duly found guilty of all the charges against him. In sentencing the man on the 23rd of November 2016, the judge said that he had no doubt that the defendant murdered Jo Cox to advance political, racial and ideological causes of violent white supremacism and exclusive nationalism that's most associated with Nazism and its modern forms. In the eyes of the law, this made the man's act of murder exceptionally serious, for which reason the judge sentenced the man to a whole life order, meaning that he will never be released. One of Mair's convictions was for GBH. When Mair started shooting and stabbing Jo Cox, 77-year-old Bernard Carter Kenny rushed to her rescue, but was then himself stabbed by the perpetrator, hence the perpetrator's charge and conviction of GBH. Mr. Carter Kenny thankfully made a full recovery and was awarded the George Cross for bravery. While he sadly died the following year, it had nothing to do with the attack that he suffered from the perpetrator. When we saw John Cooper on a game show back in the 80s, we were seeing a double murderer. John William Cooper, who was born in 1944, is also known as the Bullseye Killer, and he's a Welsh serial killer. On the 26th of May 2011, he was given a whole life order for the 1985 double murder of siblings Richard and Helen Thomas, and for the 1989 double murder of Peter and Gwenda Dixon. The murders were known in the media as the Pembrokeshire murders or the Coastal murders, because that's where the murders took place, and because of those murders, tourism in that area dropped dramatically. Cooper was also sentenced for the rape of a 16-year-old girl and a sexual assault on a 15-year-old girl, both of those attacks having been carried out while a group of 5 teenagers were held at gunpoint in March 1996 in a wooded area behind the Mount Estate in Cooper's hometown of Milford Haven in Pembrokeshire. There was literally nothing nice or good about this man. He actually got his first police records between the ages of 17 and 21, and it was for theft of a vehicle, assaulting a police officer, being drunk and disorderly, and ABH. His marriage came shortly after this point, 1966 being when, decades later, his wife died. Knowing as they then did that her husband was a killer, people feared that Cooper had offed her. The woman's death, however, came from natural causes. Giving his daughter away at her own wedding could well be the only kind thing that Cooper ever did for anyone. His son, who he used to batter and bully, having long since disowned him. Cooper once took aim at his son, literally, with a gun and pulled the trigger, delighting, no doubt, in his son's evident fear, which came from his belief that the gun was loaded, which, thankfully, it wasn't. In 1978, Cooper won all of 90,000 quid, around £500,000 in today's money, and he won that on the pools, while also winning a £4,000 car, an Austin Princess, on a Spot the Ball competition. A few short years after, though, every last penny was gone, Cooper having blown it all on racing bets and having become a heavy drinker during this period as well. As for Cooper's double murder of 1989, his second one to remind you, the police could have nabbed the perpetrator within days of discovering the bodies of Mr. and Mrs. Dixon. For some reason, however, they swallowed Cooper's story that the wedding ring that he had recently sold was none other than his very own. They don't seem to have asked to see a picture of it or have tried to trace the buyer, for instance. Probes, which may well have led them to learn that the ring in question was, of course, Mr. Dixon's. Police had seen that it was missing from the murder victim's finger. Cooper was in prison for numerous burglary offences when, in 2006, the police conducted a cold case review of the murder of the Dixons. When police revealed to Cooper that they had found Mr. Dixon's DNA on a pair of Cooper's shorts, ones that he had taken out of Mr. Dixon's rucksack and then kept after killing Mr. Dixon, and also on his shotgun, Cooper tried to frame his son. He said that his lad always used to take his clothes and wear them without his permission. Another piece of evidence against Cooper was an artist's impression of the perpetrator, which proved to be almost a direct match with the way the perpetrator looked when he went on the game show Bullseye, the episode in question having aired only days after Cooper murdered the Dixons. Personally, though, I'd say at least 1,000 other men could have been a match for the artist's sketch. Anyway, the prison murder of Mitchell Harrison will make you sick to the stomach. If this video has gripped you, I recommend you to watch this one next. I'll meet you there.